I remember the moment with painful clarity, not because it was loud, but because it wasn't. Wars in our galaxy usually begin with noise, shouts in the conclave, displays of dominance, species bearing teeth, claws, crests, colors, whatever evolutionary theater they possessed to mask fear. This time, there was only the steady hum of the high chamber and the soft echo of inevitability. Humanity was on trial. The projections hovered before us, pale, fragile bipeds from a low-gravity cradle world. Short lifespans, inconsistent genetics, fractured governance. They fought among themselves with an enthusiasm we found inefficient. The analysts spoke with confidence, their tones polished smooth by probability. Humanity was volatile, yes, but small, a problem that would resolve itself once corrected by force. The High Speaker barely paused before authorizing termination protocols. That should have been the end of it. I was tasked with observation, nothing more. Record the declaration, archive the responses, learn what minor species do when extinction is announced to them. History had taught us the pattern well. They plead, they rage, they promise loyalty, tribute, obedience. Some attempt desperation strikes, more symbolic than effective. Humans did none of that. When the declaration reached their delegates, there was no shouting, no collapse, no threats hurled across the void. They stood in silence, eyes forward, hands still. One of them nodded. Another adjusted a data slate, as if correcting a clerical error. I remember feeling irritated. Their calm felt disrespectful, as if annihilation were an inconvenience rather than a verdict. They asked no questions, they made no speeches, they did not ask for mercy. They simply requested confirmation that the transmission had been recorded. That was when the first unease crept into me. Because humans, I would later learn, do not waste moments like this. They collect them. As our fleets mobilized, I reviewed humanity's historical archives, standard procedure. What I found did not match the projections. Their history was not one of dominance, but of endurance. Plagues, world wars, near extinctions, self-inflicted catastrophes that would have erased most species from the stars. And yet, they remained. They had lost entire civilizations and rebuilt from ashes more than once. Their mythology glorified sacrifice. Their heroes were not conquerors, but survivors, the ones who endured long enough to remember. Still, the numbers were on our side, always had been. The conclave dismissed my concerns with indulgent amusement. Every species believes its suffering is unique, they said. Every doomed people thinks itself special. The first human colonies fell within days, and yet, even as orbital fire consumed their cities, their transmissions did not beg. They coordinated evacuations with chilling efficiency. Civilian vessels launched under fire. Military craft turned back alone, buying seconds with their hulls.
Their losses were catastrophic. The response was organized. They did not ask why this was happening. They prepared for it. I intercepted their internal communications, expecting panic. What I found instead were archives being unlocked, centuries-old war footage, tactical analyses from conflicts fought with primitive weapons, manuals written not for victory, but for resistance. One human officer, bleeding and smiling, looked into a cracked camera and said, "If you're watching this, it means we didn't stop them." That was when doubt hardened into fear. Our admirals celebrated early victories, blind to the pattern forming beneath them. Humanity was not improvising, they were referencing. Every strike against them activated memory, lessons paid for in blood long before we ever arrived. Then came the transmission. It was broadcast openly, without encryption, on frequencies any species could hear. The conclave expected a surrender, a plea, a last message of defiance. Instead, the file opened into silence. Then images. Ancient human wars, cities burning, soldiers charging machine fire, planets scarred by weapons far cruder than ours. Humanity's own past, cataloged, time-stamped, analyzed. I realized then, too late, what we had done. We did not declare war on a weak species. We reminded a survivor species how extinction feels and gave them a new enemy to remember. And somewhere, deep in human space, I knew they were already preparing the next archive. Because humans do not forget, they document, and they were done recording us. The war began exactly as our models promised. Human border systems fell in neat, predictable sequences, Orbital defenses were neutralized, communications disrupted, supply chains severed, every equation balanced, every projection aligned. The admirals congratulated one another, as if the outcome had already been archived. And yet, nothing unfolded correctly. The first human world we struck should have collapsed into chaos. Instead, its cities emptied with mechanical precision. Evacuation corridors activated before our bombardment patterns completed their cycles. Civilian transports launched in disciplined waves, engines flaring like dying stars. I watched in confusion as human military craft moved against those fleeing vessels, interposing themselves between civilians and annihilation. They did not retreat to save themselves. They advanced to buy time. Seconds mattered to humans, not victory, seconds. A destroyer crippled Atmoside rotated its broken hull deliberately, presenting its engines to our fryer so the evacuation lanes behind it remained shielded for just a few breaths longer. When it finally broke apart, its captain was still transmitting, issuing calm corrections, redirecting traffic, ordering others to live. They died screaming coordinates, not prayers. That was when doubt hardened into fear. Losses that should have crippled morale instead condensed it.
Human formations did not scatter when command ships were destroyed. They reorganized instantly, sometimes more efficiently than before. It was as if hierarchy meant less to them than momentum. As long as someone remained alive to shout an order, the machine continued. Other species collapse once hope becomes mathematically impossible. I have seen it countless times. When the numbers say survival approaches zero, panic spreads like a contagion. Discipline erodes. Units break. Wars end quickly after that. Humans do not calculate hope. They manufacture it. Every defeat sharpened them. Each destroyed outpost generated new tactics, new formations, new warnings transmitted at light speed to surviving fleets. Where another species would mourn a lost world, humans dissected it, asking not why it fell, but how to make the next one bleed us harder. Our tacticians grew uneasy. They complained that human casualty tolerance exceeded biological logic, that their responses were inconsistent with self-preservation, that they kept fighting battles already lost. I reviewed captured human recordings to understand the anomaly. One feed showed a squad pinned beneath orbital debris, the sky burning above them. Explosions shook the ground so violently the image blurred. By all reason, these beings should have been broken, huddled, silent, awaiting the end. Instead, one of them laughed. It was ragged, breathless, hysterical, but unmistakably laughter. They charged. Not towards survival, towards inconvenience, towards inflicting cost. That was when I began to understand the truth our projections could not model. Humans do not fight to preserve themselves in the moment. They fight to shape what comes after. Every engagement was a message written in wreckage. You will remember this. Their objective was not to stop us. It was to make sure that even in victory, we would suffer consequences that lingered. They burned their own worlds rather than gift us intact infrastructure. They poisoned data archives with traps that detonated upon access. They abandoned planets only after ensuring nothing useful remained behind. Even their retreats were engineered injuries. Winning against them felt expensive, too expensive. As weeks turned into months, the language in our command briefings changed. Words like inevitable disappeared, replaced by acceptable losses. Admirals spoke less of timelines and more of endurance. No one said it aloud, but we all felt it. This war was lasting longer than it should, and humanity was still accelerating. I watched a human carrier, mortally damaged, deliberately overload its reactors, not to destroy our fleet, but to irradiate a region of space we relied upon for navigation. The blast did not kill us, it haunted us. Ships misjumped for cycles afterward, supply lines frayed, crews whispered about cursed coordinates. Humans had turned defeat into terrain. That was when the most disturbing realization settled over me, cold and undeniable. Humanity was not fighting to win this war. They were fighting to ensure that if we did, we would never recover from it. And somewhere beyond the front lines, I sensed they were already planning how to teach us that lesson more permanently, preparing something far worse than resistance. Because a species that refuses to break does not need to win. It only needs to endure long enough to change what victory means. By the third cycle of the war, something fundamental had shifted. At first, our admirals dismissed it as coincidence, isolated anomalies at the edges of probability, a failed ambush here, a disrupted advance there, minor inefficiencies easily corrected.
After all, no emerging species could meaningfully adapt to galactic standard warfare in real time. Humanity proved us wrong within weeks. The first sign was subtle. A human frigate, already crippled, rotated its shield array in a way that made no tactical sense until our weapons struck. Instead of dispersing the energy as designed, the shield collapsed inward, folding the discharge back into its own core. The resulting detonation tore through 3 of our cruisers positioned too close for containment. An accident, the engineer said. Then it happened again, and again. Humans were learning how our systems failed, not how they functioned. They studied the seams, the assumptions, the moments where our technology trusted its own superiority. Human engineers, working from wreckage, partial data, and battlefield debris, began turning defensive systems into proximity mines, supply beacons into traps. Even our encrypted logistics signals were repurposed, rebroadcast at just the right delay to draw fleets into empty space. They were reverse engineering us mid-battle. What unsettled me most was not the speed of their comprehension, but the conditions under which it occurred. These adaptations were not born of secure research facilities or uninterrupted analysis. They were created while human worlds burned, while fleets retreated, while extinction loomed close enough to taste. Humans do not require stability to innovate. They require pressure. The more we cornered them, the more lethal they became. Our commanders began dying, not in grand engagements, but in moments doctrine could not predict. Flagships vanished after pursuing retreating human squadrons that fragmented, scattered, and then reassembled behind us. Entire task forces were lured into regions of space humans had deliberately seeded with the debris of previous defeats, wreckage tuned into sensor-blinding fields. Human forces learned to vanish. They struck, withdrew, waited. They allowed us to advance just far enough to overextend, then cut arteries instead of limbs. Fuel depots, communication relays, repair yards. They did not need to defeat our fleets if they could starve them. I reviewed tactical logs obsessively, searching for a pattern. There wasn't one. Human responses were inconsistent by design.
Where another species would codify success into rigid doctrine, humans treated every victory as provisional. If something worked once, they assumed it would fail the second time and planned accordingly. Their strategies mutated faster than our command cycles could adjust. That was when I overheard the phrase. It was spoken quietly, in a sealed briefing chamber where only high-clearance personnel were allowed. An admiral, old, scarred, and visibly shaken, ended his report with a sentence that froze the room into silence. No one laughed, because we all felt it. Human engagements began to resemble experiments. They tested our response times, our pursuit thresholds, our tolerance for loss. They baited us with deliberately weak formations to measure aggression, then adjusted their traps accordingly. Each skirmish fed data into something larger, something coordinated across light years. We were no longer fighting an enemy reacting to us. We were fighting an enemy profiling us. Captured human transmissions confirmed it. Their language was precise, analytical, chillingly calm. They spoke of our fleets as variables, of our admirals as predictable constants. One message, intercepted before self-deletion, still echoes in my mind. Let them think this is desperation. Our doctrine began to unravel. Every tactic we changed, humans countered within days. Every feint was anticipated. Every overwhelming show of force met with absence. Empty space where targets should have been, followed by strikes on infrastructure we had assumed untouchable. Even our victories felt hollow, stripped of momentum the moment they occurred. Then came the incursion. A small human strike force breached a secondary command relay, an installation buried deep within our secure network. It should have been impossible. The defenses were layered, redundant, absolute. We watched the feeds in disbelief as human vessels burned themselves through overlapping kill zones, sacrificing hull after hull to push a single data spike into range. They did not attempt extraction. They fought only long enough to transmit. The packet pierced our command space like a blade. For a fraction of a cycle, our systems froze, then purged the intrusion entirely. The damage appeared minimal. No corrupted files, no cascading failures. Nothing worth reporting, according to the technicians. Except for the file name. It appeared in a dozen logs before deletion protocols erased it completely. I felt something I had not experienced since my earliest campaigns. Anticipation. Not hope, not confidence. Dread. Because Phase 1, I realized too late, had never been about survival. It had been about learning us well enough to decide how we should be dismantled next. And whatever humanity had planned for Phase 2, they had deemed it worth dying to deliver. Which meant the war we thought we were fighting had not truly begun yet. I once believed experience was the greatest weapon a civilization could possess. I was wrong.
Experience fades. Memory does not. It was only after Phase 2 began unfolding that I understood what we were truly facing. Human tactics no longer felt improvised. They felt practiced. As if this war were not an unprecedented catastrophe to them, but a familiar shape, one they had traced before, in darker ages, against enemies far closer to home. I requested deeper access to humanity's cultural archives, bypassing the sanitized summaries we had relied upon before the war. What I found unsettled me more than any battlefield loss. Humans remember everything. Not selectively, not ceremonially. They remember with intent. Every genocide committed against them, every empire that tried to erase them, every war they lost, every war they barely survived, every moment when extinction felt inevitable. They did not bury these events in shame or soften them with myth. They preserved them. Their histories were not triumphal narratives of conquest. They were catalogs of suffering, annotated, analyzed, taught. Children learned of cities burned centuries ago. Soldiers studied defeats older than our interstellar age. Artists rendered annihilation in brutal clarity, not as warning, but as preparation. Human propaganda, I realized, was not bravado. It was testimony. I intercepted battlefield briefings where human officers projected images of their own past destructions behind them, mushroom clouds over ancient cities, starving refugees, mass graves. No heroic music, no speeches of glory, just evidence. "This is what losing looks like," one commander said calmly. They did not promise their troops victory. They promised familiarity. That was when the horror truly set in. Humanity had been rehearsing extinction for millennia, culturally, psychologically, systematically. Long before we ever noticed them, they had imagined worlds ending, societies collapsing, enemies overwhelming them. Their literature obsessed over it, their simulations reenacted it, their doctrines assumed it. They were not shocked by our brutality, they recognized it. So when we glassed one of their core adjacent worlds, a strike meant to shatter morale and end resistance, the response did not come immediately. There was no furious counterattack, no reckless retaliation. There was silence. Days passed, then weeks. Our admirals mistook the absence of response for exhaustion, for grief, for collapse. They spoke of momentum regained, of humanity finally reaching its breaking point. I knew better by then. Humans do not forget loss. They schedule it. When retaliation came, it was not proportional. It was not symmetrical. They did not strike our most valuable world or our largest fleet. Instead, they targeted something personal. A historical site. A system revered as the birthplace of one of our founding species. Not destroyed. Dissected.
Its orbital infrastructure dismantled piece by piece, broadcast live across our networks, with archival overlays comparing our ancient myths to the reality unfolding above them. The message was subtle, surgical, cruel. This mattered to you. Remember how it feels. That was the pattern. Every human response carried meaning beyond military value. They struck anniversaries, symbolic dates, cultural touchstones. Retaliation was delayed until it could align with significance only the wounded would understand. They were not trying to match damage, they were trying to teach. And the lesson was always the same. Suffering is not erased by time, it is inherited. The galaxy began to change how it spoke of humanity. Fear replaced dismissal. Analysts stopped calling them irrational and started calling them ritualistic. Their wars were no longer seen as chaotic, but as narrative, each strike a chapter, each sacrifice a citation. I watched human soldiers carry fragments of destroyed worlds into battle, soil, metal, names etched into armor, not for superstition, but for continuity. They fought alongside their dead, guided by memory rather than command. That was when I understood the final terrible truth. Humanity was no longer fighting to survive. Survival was assumed. They were fighting to define a rule, one they intended the entire galaxy to remember long after this war ended, a rule carved not into treaties or borders, but into collective consciousness. If you push us toward extinction, we will teach you what extinction feels like, again and again, until your species evolves the instinct to never try it twice. I felt fear then, not the sudden terror of imminent death, but the slow, sinking dread of inevitability, a realization that no matter how this war concluded, humanity would emerge with something more durable than territory or power. They would emerge as memory made manifest, and memory, once weaponized, does not require victory to endure. It only requires witnesses. I am one of them, and I know now that the lesson humanity is teaching us is not finished, because the more the galaxy learns, the more carefully humans seem to choose what they teach next. The engagement at Karos Reach was never meant to be remembered. On every strategic display, it registered as a minor convergence, an isolated human fleet caught too far from reinforcement, too depleted to retreat cleanly, outnumbered nearly 4-1, undersupplied, boxed in by gravity wells and overlapping interdiction fields, a textbook termination. Our admiral spoke of it casually, almost with relief. Finally, a decisive blow. Finally, a battle that would end a chapter rather than complicate it. I was aboard the command vessel Sovereign Measure when the order was given to seal the perimeter. Evacuation corridors were opened, not for the humans, but for us. Standard protocol dictated that once resistance reached collapse threshold, the enemy would attempt escape. We prepared to intercept fleeing remnants, to finish what the numbers had already decided. The humans did not run. Instead, their fleet formation tightened. I watched the sensor feeds as human vessels adjusted position, not toward the thinning edges of our encirclement, but inward, locking themselves into the center of the trap. Their escape vectors went dark one by one, powered down deliberately. Navigation beacons were severed. Even emergency jump cores were disabled. They sealed themselves in. Confusion rippled through our command deck. Tactical officers recalculated, assuming error. Why would an enemy refuse its final chance to survive? Then the first human transmission reached us. No plea, no defiance, just a calm, almost instructional tone. Engagement parameters confirmed, the voice said. What followed was not strategy, it was design. Human ships began detonating, not chaotically, not in panic, but in sequence. A frigate at the outer edge overloaded its reactors, the blast collapsing space just enough to distort our firing solutions. A second detonation followed milliseconds later, perfectly timed to intersect the shockwave, amplifying it into something unnatural. Physics bent. Our weapons misfired. Shields flared unpredictably. The battlefield itself became hostile. Human vessels were not exploding randomly. They were composing something, layering energy and mass into chained reactions that rewrote the environment around us. They turned destruction into infrastructure. Every human loss became a force multiplier. Debris fields aligned into corridors that funneled our ships into kill zones. Radiation blooms interfered with our targeting systems while leaving human-guided munitions unaffected, tuned, I later learned, to exploit the exact frequencies our shields emitted under stress. We tried to pull back. We couldn't. The humans had locked the space around us with their own dead. Admirals shouted orders, their voices sharp with disbelief. This was not how wars were fought. Sacrifice at this scale violated every principle of efficiency. No species would annihilate its own fleet so completely for a single engagement. No species except humanity. I remember one human cruiser, already aflame, holding position far longer than its hull integrity allowed. It absorbed fire meant for a dozen others, its systems failing one by one. As it finally broke apart, its wreckage triggered the next phase of the chain. The blast took 3 of our capital ships with it. That was when I understood. This was not a battle meant to be won. It was a demonstration. Human forces transmitted continuously throughout the engagement, not to coordinate, but to record. Sensor data, energy curves, casualty correlations. Everything streamed outward, escaping the battlefield faster than light. They were turning their own annihilation into a lesson. By the time our fleets disengaged, by force, tearing themselves free of the warped space at catastrophic cost, we still held the field. Human ships were gone, their fleet reduced to fragments and radiation. On paper, it was our victory. On the command deck, no one celebrated, because our losses were disproportionate beyond comprehension. Ships designed to last centuries were reduced to debris in minutes, crews shattered, supply chains broken, entire sectors rendered unstable by lingering distortions humanity had engineered into the region. We had won the battle, and lost the war's momentum entirely. As emergency repairs began, a final human broadcast cut through the static. It carried no encryption, no emotion. The message was not for us alone. It propagated outward, rebroadcast by automated systems, carried into neutral space, intercepted by observers across the galaxy. Analysts everywhere did exactly as instructed. They ran the numbers again and discovered something horrifying. If even a fraction of human fleets adopted this doctrine, if sacrifice at Karos Reach was not an anomaly but a template, then no amount of numerical superiority could guarantee victory. Every engagement with humanity carried the risk of irreversible cost. Every win could hollow out the victor beyond recovery. Galactic doctrine fractured overnight. Command academies suspended curricula. Long-held principles of attrition warfare were quietly abandoned. Species that had once measured success in territory and fleet count began re-evaluating a new variable, human cost willingness, and found it impossible to quantify. I survived Karos Reach only because the humans allowed me to. A corridor opened at the edge of the distortion field, narrow and unstable. Our vessel escaped through it by seconds. Later analysis showed the path had been shaped, left open deliberately. A witness lane. They wanted someone to tell the story. As we limped back to friendly space, I stared at the battle's final telemetry, hands unstead. The equations no longer made sense. Victory had become a liability, power a weakness. Humanity had changed the rules without ever stating them. They had shown the galaxy that a species willing to weaponize its own destruction could never be defeated in the way wars were traditionally won. And as the echoes of Karos Reach spread across the stars, I realized this was the moment everything shifted. Not when humans proved they could survive, but when they proved they could lose and still dictate the future. The galaxy would spend generations trying to adapt. Humanity would already be waiting for the next lesson. By the time the first ambassadors arrived, it was already too late. The galaxy's emissaries traveled across light years bearing gifts, treaties, and apologies, the standard panoply of desperation. They spoke of miscalculations, of unfortunate escalation, of mutual misunderstanding. They begged for a reset, an agreement, a chance to leave the past buried. Humanity listened, not with anger, not with celebration, not with the theatrics the galaxy had come to expect. They listened in silence.
They did not interrupt. They did not argue. They did not dismiss. They simply projected the histories. Behind the human delegates, massive timelines stretched across the room, spanning centuries of conflict. Each era marked with failures, betrayals, exterminations narrowly survived, and victories purchased at unbearable cost. Every record demanded attention. Every image was a warning. The galaxy's ambassadors flinched. They had expected lectures in moral superiority, coercion, or fear. Instead, they received history, unchallenged, unembellished, undeniable. The humans did not ask for borders, territories, or resources. They did not demand tribute. They did not wield revenge as a bargaining tool. They demanded memory, records, a guarantee that every action taken against them would be documented, studied, and legislated to prevent repetition. The galaxy must remember what happens when humanity is cornered. Negotiations progressed in the quietest way imaginable. Silence carried the weight of centuries. Every utterance from the galaxy's representatives was measured, cautious. Every concession was taken with scrutiny. I observed from the edge of the chamber, and for the first time I sensed something more dangerous than hatred: restraint. Humans could have razed our worlds, obliterated fleets, annihilated our species. They had the capability, the knowledge, and the precedent. Every battle had proven it. Every innovation had been designed with precision to punish overreach. Yet in these negotiations, they chose precedent over punishment. They chose teaching over slaughter. They chose the long, inevitable shaping of understanding rather than immediate obliteration. It was a fear unlike any other, one born not from the threat of violence, but from the certainty that the galaxy's mistakes were catalogued, scrutinized, and immortalized. Humanity would allow us to live, not because we were spared, but because they had decided that the lesson mattered more than revenge. Every delegate left that chamber changed. Every species recalculated the cost of future conflicts. The galaxy realized that humanity's power was not just in firepower or fleet size. It was in the memory they wielded. memory enforced as law, memory written into existence, memory guaranteed to endure. I left the negotiation room with a hollow awareness. The humans had already won, not by conquest, not by slaughter, but by ensuring that the galaxy itself would never forget. And somewhere in that silence, I understood that humanity's lesson was far from over. I have studied species that die elegantly, that collapse with a kind of predictable dignity. I have seen civilizations vanish, leaving behind archives, monuments, and echoes of their own greatness. I have calculated the point at which every species succumbs, when biology, circumstance, or statistics render continuation impossible. I was wrong about humanity, not because they were strong, not because they were clever,
Not because our models failed to anticipate every countermeasure, every improvised tactic, every sacrificial stratagem. Humanity's defining trait was something subtler, deeper, infinitely more dangerous. Refusal. Refusal to surrender meaning, even in the face of annihilation. We mistook their chaos for randomness. We mistook their resilience for luck. We mistook their victories for anomaly. But all of it, the chains of detonations, the meticulously calculated losses, the long memory of suffering, was evidence of a species that decided to endure, that insisted that survival was not granted by physics or probability, but by the conscious act of continuing. They endure because they decide to endure. They rebuild because loss does not erase purpose. They fight because the alternative, the void, is unacceptable. And in this decision lies their power. Not the power to destroy the galaxy, not the power to conquer, not even the power to avoid death. They wield the power to choose life, repeatedly, under every conceivable circumstance. In our arrogance, the galaxy attempted to shape them. Every invasion, every blockade, every threat was meant to bend, to break, to force submission. Yet every attack became an opportunity for humans to redefine themselves. We left them scarred, cornered, wounded beyond measure, and they emerged not only intact but instructive, leaving behind lessons written in fire, radiation, and memory. The war reshaped galactic ethics. It shattered doctrines that assume species are rational, predictable, mortal. It rewrote first contact protocols. And yet, for all that, the humans themselves remain surprisingly restrained. I confess my fear, now, is not of their violence. The galaxy has long studied that. We know their capacities. We know their ingenuity. We know the fury they can unleash when cornered. No, what chills me, the terror that lingers in quiet moments, is their mercy. They could have ended worlds, erased species, rewritten history with fire and blood, and yet they choose precedent. They choose lessons over slaughter. They choose survival for themselves and for others, even as they demonstrate unequivocally that the choice of destruction is theirs alone. I have come to realize that this is the trait no model could predict. Not their strength, not their intellect, not their capacity for suffering. It is their ability to endure, to act with purpose, to survive while shaping the future through restraint. Humanity still exists because it insists on it, and that insistence, unwavering, conscious, deliberate, is more formidable than any weapon in the galaxy. I do not know if the galaxy will ever comprehend it fully, but I understand it, and understanding them is terrifying. To those who come after, who study the remnants of this war, and assume the galaxy is simple, I leave this record. You will find the archives detailed, numbers precise, histories cross-referenced. You will read the chronicles of fleets lost, planets burned, strategies foiled, and innovations that reshaped the stars. You will note the moments where humans should have been extinguished and were not. You will conclude that their survival was a fluke, a statistical anomaly, a quirk of fate. You will be wrong. Humanity has returned to silence, but it is not ignorance. It is watchfulness. Their silence is deliberate, disciplined, and as impenetrable as the vacuum of space. Across thousands of worlds, in orbital stations and hidden archives, in rebuilt cities and quiet colonies, humans are observing, recording, and preparing. not for conquest, not for revenge, not for pride, but to ensure that the galaxy, every species, every civilization, every child who may one day lift their gaze to the stars, remembers what happens when they are underestimated. Never confuse kindness with incapacity. Never mistake patience for weakness. Humans are not the strongest species. Their ships may be smaller. Their weapons may appear rudimentary. Their politics may seem chaotic. And yet, they are the last species you want to test. Their strength lies not in brute force, but in endurance. Not in domination, but in purpose. Not in their ability to destroy, but in their refusal to be destroyed. Every war they survive, every atrocity they endure, every trial they transform into lessons, adds to a species-wide resilience that cannot be calculated or predicted. They do not fight for glory. They fight for principle. They do not fight for territory. They fight to teach the galaxy a rule it will never forget. Push humanity toward extinction, and you will inherit the cost. You will endure their lessons, measured and precise, written not just in fire and ruin, but in the memory of all who witness it. The galaxy may try to move on. It may forget, but humanity will not. They carry centuries of survival, trauma, ingenuity, and moral resolve like a weapon forged through suffering. They are watchful, patient, and relentless in their quiet. Do not misinterpret this. They are not your allies. They are not your enemies, yet. They are something far worse for those who underestimate them. They are the standard by which the galaxy will learn the cost of arrogance. To all who hear this, let their history guide you. Let their memory teach you. For in every measured step, every silent calculation, every restraint displayed, humans demonstrate the truth that will endure long after civilizations rise and fall. They are humanity, and the galaxy has only just begun to understand them.